My name is Brendan O'Malley. I was a student of Mr. Morris at St. Louis University High School from 1990 to 1994. A few months before the start of my freshman year of high school in 1990, a form was sent out asking you to choose which foreign language you'd like to study. The choices were Spanish, French, Latin, Chinese, and Russian. For no reason other than thinking it sounded interesting, I picked Russian. We started freshman Russian with the first of a series of Russian teaching books Mr. Morris had authored himself called Litsom k Litsu, or in English, Face to Face. Within a few months of starting Russian in the fall of 1990, a group of about 15 Russian students came over to SLU High and spent a month studying side by side with us. This was a chance not only to apply the early Russian we had learned with actual Russians, but it gave us a chance to really experience and get to know people from what felt like another planet at the time, literally just months after the end of the Cold War. This was an exchange program that Mr. Morris had created himself in partnership with a school in Moscow called Moscow School Number 23. It involved a group of students coming to St. Louis from Moscow every fall, and then the students who had hosted them going to Moscow in the spring to stay with their Russian counterpart host family. Additionally, Mr. Morris arranged for a native Russian teacher to come live in St. Louis and teach at SLU for a full year every year so that we could be taught not only by Mr. Morris, but by a real Russian native speaker. I look back about that and I think about how amazing that was that he created all of that by himself. It really is like an artist at work making something incredibly meaningful and beautiful and complex out of nothing and touching so many people's lives in the process. In the fall of 1992, it was our class's turn to participate in the exchange program, and my family took in a girl named Anna Nikolaeva, who lived with my family for a month. It's not an exaggeration to say that she quickly became like a daughter to my mom, who had only 2 boys, my brother and I, prior in the house. A few months later, in March of 1993, Mr. Morris, with only one other adult who did not speak a word of Russian, took 23 16 and 17-year-olds, myself included, to Moscow for 1 month to stay with the families of the same people we had hosted a few months prior. I still find this hard to believe when I look back on it. I have 2 children of my own, and I can barely control them in the confines of my own house. But Mr. Morris took 23 teenagers to a not entirely stable country in a city of 15 million people and trusted us as young men to be respectful and to rise to the occasion of being ambassadors for our school and even for our country. And I can say honestly that with only a handful of exceptions, one of them being my completely, totally unsupervised 17th birthday party, that we mostly did. Everyone had a deep respect for Mr. Morris and knew that with the freedom and this amazing opportunity he was giving us also came responsibility. He was different than a lot of the teachers we were used to in that we felt like he really viewed us as adults. But in turn, he expected us to act like adults, and we kind of mostly tried to most of the time. After high school, and a result of what I had learned with 4 years with Mr. Morris, I continued to study Russian in college and spent a full academic year studying in Moscow. I returned again to Russia a bit older in 2005 and spent a couple years there as an adult, working in an NGO, all the while still very close with my friends from the 1993 exchange program, including my friend Anna, who I met through Mr. Morris. Anna is still to this day a great friend and even flew from Moscow to San Francisco for my wedding in 2013. We talk almost every week still. She specifically asked me to send her love in regards to Mr. Morris's family, as he had a huge impact on her life as well. There's a few short memories of Mr. Morris I'd like to share if you don't mind, and then I'll stop talking. Mr. Morris was the first person I knew to use email. He was actively using it in 1990, and I have to assume he was onto it prior than that. I hadn't even heard of email in 1990 when I was a freshman, and I remember when I started college in 1994, still hardly anyone had heard of email. Mr. Morris was way ahead of his time. But more remarkable to me than that was how he used email and how he got us to use email. Mr. Morris set up a digital pen pal relationship for each of us with a stranger, a student at our partner school in Moscow, and using his email account, he'd send and receive letters to and from Moscow. We'd type out our email on a floppy disk, give it to him, he'd work his magic spell, and it would send off to Russia, and vice versa. So he used this knowledge he had quite ahead of his time to facilitate and nurture real human connections and meaning between students and people 5,000 miles away on the other side of the world. It's truly incredible. In my junior year of high school, about a month before our exchange trip to Russia, our high school put on the musical Grease, in which I played one of the two lead roles, Danny Zuko. I was holding for applause. I thought maybe some of you. No one was there. Thank you. You were there. If you're not familiar with the story of Grease, and sorry for any spoilers for people that have been wanting to see it for 45 years and haven't, the show concludes with the innocent, sweet, wholesome character Sandy deciding that to win over the boy, she needs Danny. She needs to be more like him and his greaser friend, so she changes how she looks and how she acts to do so. Wanting to support me, Mr. Morris came to the show. On the next day back at school, I asked him how he liked it. He was kind and complimentary and said something along the lines of, "Well, you did a good job, but I just don't like the message of that show." Confused, I asked him what he meant. He said, "Well, I don't think a woman should have to change who she is to get a man to like her." Wow. Of course, I had no idea at 16 how to process that, so I just thought, wow, that's kind of weird. Yeah. But it didn't take much thinking on it before I realized, of course, he's right. But more importantly, how cool to say something like that to a 16-year-old kid who is impressionable and growing and learning, and who still to this day, 30 years later, remembers it and agrees with it. I had a band in high school, and we made an album, a cassette tape, that we sold for $5. Mr. Morris, when he heard about it, asked to buy 2 copies, one for himself and his wife, Beth, who was a huge music fan and a musician herself, and one for his daughter, Lisa. I was thrilled when he told me a few weeks later that Lisa had played it over the stereo system at the place she was working at the time, and that some customers at the store had even commented on it, saying they liked it. I'm assuming that last part was probably made up, but it was appreciated nonetheless. He was always, always supportive. After we got back from an exchange in Moscow in 1993, Mr. Morris encouraged me to enter a national Russian-speaking contest for high school students. I entered it, and having recently gotten back from a month in Russia with tons of practice and probably a bit of an advantage, won the competition. Applause break. Yeah, thank you. I had to build it in. But what I remember about this most is getting home from school and my dad saying, "There's a message for you on the answering machine, but it's entirely in Russian." It was Mr. Morris calling to congratulate me entirely in Russian, while in the process making me feel so cool in front of my dad because I actually understood all of it and I could report on my little victory. In preparing to say a few words today, and I apologize if I've gone on too long, I tried to find some statistics or a ballpark number of how many teachers or professors an average person will have in a normal academic career. Even the most conservative number I could find was many hundreds of teachers. I'm sure everyone here has had a teacher or 2 or 3, if they were lucky in their lives, whose impact lasted deep into their adulthood and in truly incalculable ways. It really is amazing how much someone can touch your life and affect your life, and how all of those things they gave you and taught you and opened your mind up to then branch out to other things that affect your life, and so forth, until you realize that so many of the things about your life can be traced back to one person. Several times over the years as an adult, I had tried to find Mr. Morris, whom I hadn't seen since high school, to share with him some of the memories I've shared with you and to thank him. But surprisingly, the person who had introduced me to email had very little digital presence and was quite hard to find. I tried reaching out to teachers at SLU. I tried that AOL address I still remembered from many years ago, gwm8780@aol.com. I tried the American Council of Teachers of Russian website. I tried his book publisher from the book that he wrote. I even tried to message what appeared to be long, dormant Facebook pages. No luck. But at some point a few years ago, after my family and I moved back to St. Louis, I got seriously determined to find Mr. Morris. And with a little luck, finally got a lead via a teacher at SLU and was able to reach him. Last spring, we arranged for me to come pick him up and take him to lunch, and then we went back to his home in St. Charles to chat. Though his memory was fading a bit, and he was slower to move than the man I had not seen in 30 years, his wit and razor-sharp intellect were most certainly intact. During our conversation, I was able to share with him many of the same memories I did today with you, and was able to tell him how much he had impacted my life. He listened to me ramble, much like you all have here, and he said, "You're going to make me cry, but thank you." In just the few days since we've learned of Mr. Morris's passing, I've talked to numerous friends from my old Russian class, from our one small window of his huge teaching career, all of whom said how much he impacted their lives and what a great and unique man he was. I have to assume there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, more people like me whose lives were changed in truly immeasurable ways by Mr. Morris. So thank you, Mr. Morris. You lived a life of incredible meaning, and you will live on in everyone whose lives you touched so deeply.